Good morning, everyone. My name is Jess Yoder. We're going to get started here. Just a few housekeeping things that I wanted to remind you of. If you could ensure that you are on mute. We have a wonderful teammate of ours at Department of Education, Don Gilroy, who's in the background helping with some technical assistance. If you do have any audio or video issues, feel free to send him a private message through WebEx. His name again is Don Gilroy. He can help you figure some of those things out. So we are going to start here into the content in a second. I just wanted to let you know that we will have time for questions at the end. Feel free to interact in the chat box. Some of my teammates are ensuring that they're putting the link to the slides that we're going to be using so you can access those. And then there will be a link to click at the end in order to receive PGP. So you will receive 1 hour of PGP for being here today, which we will follow up with a certificate via email. Just so you know, this webinar will be recorded for future access. So if you are not interested in being on video, we completely understand. But this will be a great resource for you if you had some teammates that were not able to join us today. If they're able to watch it later and access the slides, they will be able to do that. We will have that link ready and on our website here in about 1 week. Before I jump to our first slide here, I wanted to acknowledge all of the teachers on the call today. I know it is Teacher Appreciation Week, so thank you so much for your service. Your job has never been harder than it has been in the past 2 months. So we really hope that you walk away today with some information that can help you move forward with your students and your colleagues. All right, so we'll get started with introductions here in a second. I have many teammates that are going to help us introduce some of this content today, but there is, I wanted to introduce quickly Project Aware, and on that first slide you saw 3 logos, Department of Education, Project Aware, and Avon. So there are really 2 reasons why Project Aware is relevant today. The first is that Avon, who's going to be helping us out today, was one of the original school districts chosen to be a part of Project Aware as a demonstration site. So they have been on this journey with us for almost a year and a half, working into 2 years now, and it is really the reason why the Avon Mental Wellness team that you will hear from today was able to dedicate and intentionally respond to the collective mental wellness of their school community. They came together and they have continued to provide information, referrals, and services during this time, and I really couldn't be more proud to associate myself with this team. It is also relevant because we just released our call for applications for school districts or local education agencies this past Friday. So we are releasing some additional funding next fall for school districts who want to join as the second cohort. So if you're interested in that, feel free to check out our new website. There is listed on the side, and applications are due by June 1st. So by the end of this webinar, we hope that you will understand what the grieving process looks like, what it sounds like, and what it feels like for both adults and students. We hope that you're able to identify different types of grief in order to name it, in order to tame it. We'll talk more about that later. We hope that you understand how to adapt this information for your school district or your local education agency and other audiences as well. And then we also hope that you walk away with resources which can hopefully be distributed to your school community or adapted in some way. We do want to note that this is an educational overview. It is not intended to serve as information on how to counsel those that are in grief. It's really meant to arm you with information. We did put a website there at the bottom, bewellindiana.com. The Division of Mental Health and Addiction, who is a wonderful partner of ours in this work, they spent a lot of time in response to COVID in pulling together sites and crisis referrals into one place. So if you haven't checked that out, highly encourage you to do it. Anywhere that you are in Indiana, if you're looking for resources, mental health supports, that would be a really great place to start. I will quickly reintroduce myself and then pass it on to our team here today. Again, I'm Jess Yoder. I'm the Project Aware Specialist. I work for the Department of Education, and I'm going to pass it along to Krista to introduce herself.
Hi, my name is Krista Fay, and I am the Mental Wellness Coordinator for Avon Community Schools. And I'm also going to virtually introduce Pam Poles, who is one of our elementary mental wellness team members. She serves Cedar, Hickory, Pine Tree, and White Oak Elementary. She can't be here with us today, but we love her and miss her. And I will pass it off to Amy.
Hi, my name is Amy Staley, and I am the mental wellness provider for the other elementary schools in Avon. I work at Maple, River Birch, and Sycamore Elementary Schools, and so now I will pass it on to Colleen.
Hi, I'm Colleen Ray. I am the mental wellness provider at the intermediate and middle schools in Avon. Brittany?
All right, good morning, everyone. I'm Brittany Chevron, and I serve Avon High School as our mental wellness provider. So I'm going to get us started today with our presentation on grief during COVID-19. So as you've likely heard people or mental health professionals describing during this current reaction to the pandemic, they've been relating it to that of grief. So while grief most often is used in relation to the emotions that come up after someone dies, we really can't experience it anytime we have a loss or a significant change. We know that right now, some people really are feeling grief related to a loved one dying. In general, this is often one of the most difficult things that anyone ever goes through in life, but it's made extra difficult right now because the rituals and ceremonies to honor these transitions aren't allowed to take place in the way that they normally would. Typically, it would be a time where we can come together with family and friends for support, and those things not happening are compounding the sense of loss. Grief related to death is easy for most of us to understand and imagine. However, grief that can feel more difficult to wrap our heads around are those invisible losses, or the ones that are so big and vast that it's hard to put words to. Most people inherently understand that grief is going to impact our emotions, just like this picture here indicates, where we might feel sad, lonely, anxious, or numb. But sometimes we overlook the physical toll that it takes, like chronic exhaustion or changes to our sleeping patterns. Grief changes our relationships and the way that we engage socially, often causing people to want to isolate or, on the flip side, to cling to those people who are around. When we experience loss, it shapes our entire worldview and influences the way we make meaning of our lives. Some people will begin to question their faith or continue to find themselves asking why this has happened. What we are noticing now is that there is a lot of individual grief happening as well as collective grief. Individual grief is easier to recognize, such as a person struggling if their graduation or wedding's been canceled. Collective grief is often harder to pinpoint, though, because it can be so vague or intangible. Some examples of this type of grief include the loss of routine, loss of plans or things people were looking forward to, like vacations or concerts. It could be the loss of connection, the loss of a sense of safety, or simply the loss of what felt normal. These things are not just felt within our own communities or our state, but around the entire world, which makes this current experience so unique. And quite honestly, people are just not used to having this much grief in the air. There isn't really much escape from it, no matter where you turn. And for many of us, it's feeling like a dense fog hanging overhead with the way out being unclear. So today we're going to go through the 5 parts of grief and highlight some specific examples of how this might show up during this pandemic. I want to point out that while we are using Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's well-known grief model, not everyone will experience all 5 parts we discuss, nor do people experience these parts in any specific order. We're just using this to help provide some framework for what might show up for us when we go through loss. I find things like this to be useful because it helps normalize what can often feel like a really not normal experience. All right, next slide, please. The first part we're going to discuss is denial. This typically shows up as shock or disbelief. In the case of getting news that a person died, one might say it's a lie or be certain that there must have been some kind of mix-up and the information is wrong. During this pandemic, denial has shown up as a belief that COVID-19 is not as big of a deal as the media is portrayed, or that it's a conspiracy of the government. This might also look like people protesting the lockdown, or even a held belief that once this is all over, that things will seamlessly and immediately go back to the way that they were. Denial is that initial shock that many of us experienced when things started shutting down and getting canceled. I know for us in Avon, it started as one day out of school and e-learning. Then it turned into 2 weeks of e-learning, and then the remainder of the semester. At first, every new piece of news and update felt surprising and shocking, but as time went on and denial subsided regarding the severity of the situation and what we were all attempting to deal with, it felt easier to integrate the reality of what was happening. Something important that I want to point out here too is that it's often easy to associate the experience of denial as being bad or foolish. But I want to acknowledge that denial shows up with a purpose. It's our brain's way to protect us when information feels too big or too impactful to fully integrate. It really provides a brief buffer and helps us ease our way into something difficult that we are going to have to learn to live with. It's a common experience to have denial when we are informed of loss. However, it's not a healthy resting place for us. Instead, the goal is to eventually face it and find ways to process through it. Next slide.
Okay, so now we're going to be talking about anger. And when we're grieving, anger is just a natural part of that process. Anger can be empowering and it can help us gain some control over what we might be feeling and what we might be experiencing. It can make us feel invincible, so we might say or do things that we normally wouldn't do when we're feeling calm and safe. Both youth and adults feel empowered by anger. So again, we want to remember that anger is not a resting place, and staying in this mode too long can become debilitating. We can start to experience a slow burn where we feel like we're always stuck at a low level angry setting. And this will start to impact our relationships with others and our relationships with ourselves, because anger can be exhausting without a healthy outlet. So when we're thinking about grief and the relation to COVID-19, many of us feel angry when we realize that everything that we're used to has changed and the reality of our current situation has started to sink in. We're angry at the missed opportunities and the things we were looking forward to suddenly being taken away from us. And we were not consulted about having to stay home, and our permission wasn't sought when quick decisions just needed to be made. We feel like we've been denied our ability to self-determine, and anger can be a result of that. So because it's difficult to just be directly angry at COVID-19, many of us are going to channel our anger in different ways. So our anger is going to be extended to others, despite what their involvement is in the situation. So we're going to be more easily frustrated with family members. We're going to lose our temper more quickly, or even become angry at simple objects around the house. And I'm looking at the TV remote when that's missing. So we may find ourselves in more power struggles than normal. We might refuse to comply with suggested guidelines and rules. So some words that you might be hearing or saying could be, none of my students or families are getting back to me. Why is there still no toilet paper at the store? Why do I keep eating? I'm not even hungry and I just finished a whole bag of chips. I have 3 computers and they are all dead. So for me, anger has sounded like I've recorded my video lesson 3 times and it still isn't saving. My computer keeps crashing in the middle of a Zoom call, and my dog is barking at everything. So just start at the beginning. It may be easier or more comfortable to recognize when we are acting angry. So, do I notice myself stomping, a dramatic sigh? Am I yelling or cursing? These are all signs that we're having a big feeling. And now is when we can practice the idea of name it to tame it. So once we recognize and name our anger, we start to feel it lessen its hold on us. It can be scary, but this is a chance to start to really feel, experience what's under our anger. So are we feeling sad, scared, lonely, lost, overwhelmed, confused, discouraged, or bored? So when we allow ourselves to recognize this anger as well as the multitude of feelings that are underneath it, we start to take mentally healthy steps forward. When we're speaking to our students here in Avon, we try to highlight this part of the grief process by normalizing the feelings and encouraging healthy ways to channel that angry energy. Right. So next slide.
Okay, so the next part that we're going to be talking about is bargaining. And in this stage, we desire for life to go back to normal and may think about what could have been done differently to prevent this current situation. While we recognize the reality in this stage, we're not quite ready to give up the idea that we're still somewhat in control over our situation. And we try to compromise to find a way out. Bargaining may bring up some feelings of blame and guilt, which is your brain trying to make sense of what simply doesn't. Bargaining can sound like, if I stay home all week, I can hang out with my friends this weekend, or I can be around someone if they don't look sick and we both wash our hands really well. And for adults, these statements could also be read in the reverse. You may find yourself saying, if this crisis could be over and my kids go back to school, I promise I will be the best parent in the world. We may also find ourselves bargaining with a new expectation, to quote Esther Perel, of not just working from home, but working with home. All of our roles are now bleeding into one another as boundaries have become blurred beyond recognition. We find ourselves wearing all of our hats at once: parent, teacher, spouse, employee, housekeeper, chef, emotional regulator, barista, pet parent, and maybe somewhere towards the end of the day, you can get a few minutes to be yourself too. This can cause us to bargain with anyone or anything to help us get through minute to minute. If I could get through one work call, one e-learning assignment for my kids, one load of laundry, one set of dishes, everything would be better. But that's not true, because the next minute happens and bargaining begins again. Bargaining is an unconscious effort to manipulate the situation, and it's an attempt to make a deal with someone or something to get an outcome that you want or feel that you need. It can also be an attempt to get a sense of relief from the uncomfortable feelings that are being experienced. Again, this is not bad or wrong, and it's a normal part of people's process. Next slide.
All right, so the next part we're going to discuss is depression. Now, I'm going to guess in general that this is probably the section that everyone is already most familiar with or has the greatest amount of information on. So I'll still provide some background, but in general, I want to discuss how this might be showing up right now. All right, we're going to quickly dip into clinical space here for a minute. When considering depression, we want to be aware of changes in our regular patterns. This includes changes to our eating and our sleeping habits. This could also be the prolonged loss of interest in activities that we previously enjoyed. And it could look like tapping into some unhealthy coping habits. While we recognize that some of these signs and symptoms may be coming up specifically due to our current situation in this pandemic, it is still just as important to take these seriously and to seek further medical and mental health care if needed. So, real talk, our team struggled the most with this section when thinking about what we wanted to share with you all today. And when we took some time to reflect on why that was, we realized it's because we are all living this right now too. This is 100% a parallel process. Working from home day after day has caused some of us to feel like we're living in a real life version of the movie Groundhog's Day. We're feeling a perpetual state of what I like to call the blahs, where all the days feel and look the same, and tapping into motivation is super hard. Another thing we've noticed right now is that feelings of depression can get a little complicated when we start comparing ourselves to others. For example, we may see other people during this time thriving, or it at least appears that way when someone's produced 87 varieties of banana bread or completely mastered a new skill. Feelings of depression can also be exacerbated when comparison is placed upon us, which for a student could sound like, other kids can get their e-learning done, why can't you? Or for a parent, can't you just get through one Zoom call without your children interrupting? We can start to accumulate these complicating factors on top of a situation that already feels big and challenging, which then just makes it harder to find a way to tap into feelings of joy, delight, or gratitude. Depression during COVID-19 looks a lot like chronic exhaustion and increased irritability. It's that feeling that we just can't get it together or collect enough energy to do the things that seem like they should be simple. For example, not having the bandwidth to make dinner for your family, even though you've been home all day and it appears as if you've had plenty of time to do so. We feel like we should be able to handle more than we actually are, get more accomplished than we do, and feel better than how we actually feel. As with all the other parts we've been discussing, feelings of depression are a normal part of the process for those experiencing grief or loss. Just because somebody has these feelings doesn't mean that anything's wrong with them or that they're going to feel that way forever. It's just another signal and piece of information letting you know that you really care about something, that it matters to you, and therefore coping with the change is bringing up challenges. And that's all right. All right, next slide, please. Okay, here we are, the fifth part of grief we're discussing today, and that is acceptance. For most of us, this is the place we want to get to in our process. This is a place where we can acknowledge the reality of the situation and find some peace with it. Now, this does not mean that we like what's going on. It does not mean that at all. It just means that we're no longer resisting it. In comparison to reactions I discussed during denial, where every new piece of information feels like a shock, here, when we get new information that might be upsetting, we take it in fully from the start. We might still feel disappointed, but we immediately move forward given the new reality. We adjust plans and look for ways to make the most out of the current situation. Acceptance is knowing that we won't just be going back to the way that things were, but instead are going to have to find a new normal together. In this place, we allow ourselves to let in joy and experience positive feelings, all while acknowledging the truth of what is hard. Another important component that comes up with acceptance is making meaning. What takeaways or personal growth do we open to on the other end of this process? Perhaps that's recognizing the importance of time for rest and allowing space for it. For some of us, it may be acknowledging the gift of being able to have quality time with your family, where you can be fully present with them instead of carrying out the never-ending to-do list like many of us did before. Some people have felt a deepening in their relationships or have finally been able to accomplish things that they've been putting off for a long time. Whatever silver lining or meaning somebody makes after experiencing loss, it is a sign that they have reached a place of acceptance. slide, please.
Okay, so at this time, that was a lot of information. Thank you so much. At this time, we're going to press pause, and we'd love for you to interact in the chat box or grab a piece of paper on the side if you want to reflect personally. I know as I was listening to that, I was thinking of some of my own thoughts, some of my own behaviors, and a lot of feelings came up. So I'd love if you would take a moment to identify one of the behaviors, phrases, or feelings that were mentioned in the previous slides associated with any of the steps associated with grief that maybe you have expressed over the past 2 months. So take a moment to either write that down on a piece of paper, or if you are willing to share in the chat box. We'd love for you to do that. I'm doing my best here to keep up with all of the things coming through the chat box. I saw one that resonated with me specifically, serious disorganization. It's almost like I want to be organized, but I can't find the way in which I can be organized in this moment. It sometimes makes me a little angry.
Jess, this is Christy. I'm seeing a lot of feeling ineffective in our roles, and I think that's a really common theme that we're seeing during this time, and trying to play so many different roles and being aware of that, especially most educators, counselors, and social workers are pretty much doers and helpers, and to not feel like you're being able to do that role can be really hard during this time.
This is Krista here, and I'm also seeing a lot of feelings of angry and irritability, and a lot of noticing and recognizing that. And I think that that's really important too, because I saw someone, you know, they miss being able to plan, they miss being able to do things that help them feel empowered. We've lost some of those skills or some of the access that we had before, and it's okay to feel angry and irritated by that. This is also a time to think about recognizing what are other skills that we can tap into, and knowing that sometimes we feel stuck and we're, you know, I don't have my go-to skills, so now what? And so that's a good question for us to kind of rest in is, so now what?
Yeah, and a moment of just appreciation. The vulnerability that people have brought this morning has me a little lost for words. So thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. And I think from this point on, feel free to continue writing down your thoughts in the chat box. We're going to move on to the next slide. So Krista, if you want to take over.
Yep. And so again, I'm Krista, and this next slide may be a little bit helpful on kind of continuing that idea of understanding and education. So we want to spend a little bit of time talking about different types of grief and loss, and this isn't to continue to overwhelm with the information overload that's been happening during this time period, but to continue validating the idea of name it to tame it, that we may not be able to accurately identify what's going on if we're not taught language about variances within grief. So the first type of grief we want to name is that of ambiguous loss. Ambiguous loss was coined by Pauline Boss in 1999 and addresses unresolved mourning, where there's no definitive closure or a lack of clear understanding about what's happened. In general, ambiguous loss is frequently referenced when a family member is experiencing the situation of a missing person, or in the case where a family is supporting an individual with Alzheimer's or dementia. And the framework of ambiguous loss is especially poignant in our current situation. Of the two types of ambiguous loss, right now what we are dealing with is the psychological or emotional presence of physical absence. And then again, that would apply if there's a missing person situation. The other type of loss, which would be more relatable to Alzheimer's or dementia, is physical presence, but psychological absence. With COVID-19, we are in a really unique situation of being able to access other people virtually, but not physically. And there's a fantastic tweet going around by an Italian management professor, and I'm trying really hard. I'm going to go really slow, and I'm doing my best with where I am right now. His name is Gianpiero Petraligheri. That reads, it's easier being in each other's presence or in each other's absence than in the constant presence of each other's absence. And I'm going to read that one more time because it resonates so powerfully with what we're doing right now. It's easier being in each other's presence or in each other's absence than in the constant presence of each other's absence. This idea, this tweet that he put out speaks so directly to the idea of ambiguous loss. Pauline Boss also gives us another brilliant quote about the duality of ambiguous loss. And she says, I intentionally hold the opposing ideas of both absence and presence because I have learned that most relationships are indeed both. The other type of grief that we want to specifically address and again name today is that of disenfranchised grief. Disenfranchised grief was coined by Ken Doka in 1987, and he defined it as grief that cannot be openly acknowledged, socially sanctioned, or publicly mourned. This is grief that is stigmatized or avoided as other people don't feel comfortable talking about it. Some classical examples of disenfranchised grief could include and when an individual goes away to prison, the event of a miscarriage or a stillbirth, death from HIV or AIDS, or a death from an overdose. Disenfranchised grief occurs in 5 broad categories, and those include the lack of recognition in the relationship, lack of acknowledgement of the loss, the exclusion of the griever, the circumstances of the death, or the ways that individuals grieve. We may be noticing increasing examples of disenfranchised grief in our current reality. For example, if someone passes away, but it's not from COVID-19, the family may feel their loss is not as acknowledged as that of someone who passes away from this novel coronavirus. We may also start to expand and recognize a growing list of losses that could be feeling disenfranchised, including the loss of autonomy, the loss of agency, the loss of privacy, the loss of occupational identity, the loss of occupational capacity, social connections, activities, and boundaries. And those were things that I heard in the chat too, people feeling like they're expected to be as productive as they were and they can't, or they don't have the bandwidth or the capacity right now. One thing we want to remember and attend to is that loss is loss. Sizes of losses vary, but the feelings that one experiences are very real. And the intensity that someone experiences their feelings is very real. Minimizing or devaluing someone's feelings of grief pose a real risk of damage to the griever. This is an opportunity to be intentional about providing presence to the person who's grieving without bypassing or sidestepping the situation because of our own discomfort. When we talked about grief in Avon, we really tried to bring to mind the idea that these are brave words that we're speaking and brave presence that we're giving. Grief is uncomfortable and it's scary, but it's also part of the human experience. We're experiencing grief and loss on a whole new level right now, but we are all touched by this. We're all affected by it. So it's something that we can all tap into and hold space with one another, even if it is virtually through a webcam right now. Next slide, please. And so this is just a great illustration of how we want grief to work versus how grief actually works. We want grief to look linear and for it to have a phase 1 and a phase 2 and a definitive start and a definitive stop so we can check it off our list and move on. Grief is a tangle. Grief is a lot, and grief doesn't stop. Some days are better than others. Some days aren't. And that's okay. That's okay. It's just knowing that you're going to continue to take a breath through. You're going to continue to take one more step, or you may need to pause. But when you're ready, you're going to take one more breath, and you're going to take one more step. Next slide, please. So we did a lot of talking about giving some kind of quick overviews on grief. We did some education on some different types of grief, again, in that idea of name it to tame it. And now we wanted to give some help. So what we did over at Avon is we have been recording weekly Mental Health Monday videos, and you can find those on our website or on our Twitter, and we'll make sure that we share all of those with you. But we really wanted to make sure that we were providing touch points for our students and for our staff. It's really easy to source things from the internet and put it out there, but it has a lot more impact when you can actually see the person who works in your building delivering a message with all of their idiosyncrasies that they do. I do a lot of hand talking. I'm gonna put those down for a minute. So it's helpful, and it just gives a quick visual touch point. Even though we can't be together, we can still see one another, hear that comforting voice, and see that familiar face. When we did these videos, and we're continuing to do them as well, we take a lot of time and we script out what we want to say in advance. This really lets us kind of fact check and make sure that we're providing information at the appropriate levels for students and for adults, kind of in broad strokes. So we go through and we check our language. As clinicians, we go back and forth and we kind of just make sure that we're hitting the points that we want to make sure are really important to hit. And it just kind of helps the videos flow smoothly. And so, in the effort of sharing and trying to lighten the load for people, we in the slides, we're giving you access to the grief script that we use that you guys can modify and adapt. We also, there are ways that you can record these messages if you want to have more than just your face, but like a PowerPoint. Some folks are using a program called Loom, which allows you to track data so you can determine how many people are viewing your video. So you can kind of determine effectiveness when you're thinking of programming, and if this is something that I need to do moving forward in the future, how can I demonstrate efficacy of services? Loom allows you something unique. It allows you to look at total views and unique views. On YouTube, you can just see total views. So if I want to bump my numbers, I could just go and watch my video over and over and over again. Loom allows you to see, if you have 5 views, but 3 are from one student. And Loom also can allow you to create, usernames, so you can see if your students that you're hoping to see the video are or are not, which again allows you for planning. We also put all of our messages out through social media. We tweet them every Monday. We make sure that we include the information on our district webpage, on our school web pages, in our school newsletters, and we also try to include visuals. I've seen a couple people that they really like the images that were put up. The first one from Wholehearted Counseling, I need to give us permission to use that. But it really kind of helps too with people if they don't have a lot of time. That grief image is very powerful. It says a lot without me having to explain it to you. So we also try to include visuals to kind of help for people who could be accessing that information. The one thing I did want to add really quickly is that as we're sharing the resources with you guys, if you choose to use the script or any of the materials, you want to adapt it, make it fit for you, your situation, your school, your district, if you would please consider using either hashtag AMWT or hashtag Project Aware, because this initiative that we're doing with our mental wellness team is funded through Project Aware. We want to make sure that people know where this is coming from, because we are really in the mode of trying to change the frequency of talking about these topics around mental health, really destigmatizing and making sure people have a safe place to say the words that need to be said, and making sure that there are appropriate people there to hear, support, and respond to the situations that are going on. As providers, we all know that we're, looking ahead at a looming mental health crisis when things are able to return to a more typical semblance of normal. And so making sure that people know, hey, we're here. Hey, we are going to listen to you. We're going to hold space with you, and we're going to get through this together. We're not going to solve it overnight. There's no one size fits all, but we will work with you to help you work to get to where you would like to be in a healthy place. Next slide, please. And again, in the interest of kind of sharing and hoping to provide some clear resources for everyone, these are all, again, things that we sourced and vetted as a group. I've broken the resources into 3 different slides just to kind of help make it easier for you to find what you're looking for. These first ones on grief in general, we shared during the week that we talked about grief. And again, kind of some of those ideas of anticipatory grief and collective grief, right? Like not being able to, feeling grief about not being able to look ahead and plan more than a few days at a time. grief that we are feeling, as Brittany mentioned, you know, not just as a person or a family or as a county or a state or a nation, globally, we're feeling this kind of collective sense of grief. And then I just wanted to point out too, there's a really great image on that cartography of grief. This artist has done an amazing job of really illustrating, because grief is not a linear process, how it would look on a map. If you were to visit a different point in grief at a different space and time, how it feels. And I love the artwork that she created. So if you have a chance, I'd really recommend you click on that. That visual is just very, very powerful. Next slide, please. This is information, and this is again about ambiguous loss, because some of these were kind of new and interesting as we were kind of digging into grief and understanding a little bit more about, you know, what's going on and naming things so that we can start to breathe, because we know that it has a name now. So once we know what it is, what can we do about it? How can we help it? How can we be present with it? So these are links to Pauline Boss and a little more about ambiguous loss in a classical sense of those two different types. Next slide, please. And again, I just want to kind of echo back to some of the things that we saw in the chat box, because those really resonated around ideas of disenfranchised grief. This is just some really good information about what is disenfranchised grief, different types, different examples. And some of these are really rich and really powerful to think about, not just because of the timing of this situation, but when you think about moving forward, how can you support people who are experiencing a loss, not just the loss through death, but the loss of a job, a marriage, a child, a hope, a dream, a plan, a vacation. And it's not to minimize or be silly, but it's to say that these are real. The feelings are real. So how do we support and wrap around those? Next slide.
Thanks, Krista. So this is Jess again, and we wanted to come in from the DOE side to make sure that we put some other resources. I feel like the end of this webinar has been resource overload. So hopefully you can have access to the slides and come back to them when you have some more time or when things come up in your school community. But we wanted to make sure that we put these also on your radar as they closely relate. Evansville-Vanderburgh School Corporation has done a lot of work in providing guidance and scripts and strategies for supporting students and educators. They're really seeing this from both sides of the aisle during COVID. So if you click that link there, it will gain you access to those scripts, which can be adapted. We just ask that you, if you do use them, that you provide some support for giving credit to the Evansville-Vanderburgh School Corporation, because their mental health team did a lot of work on this initially once we started closing our schools due to COVID. The resource there in the middle has been put out within Dr. McCormick's weekly note, as well as on Twitter and within our social emotional behavioral wellness emails. And it is an infographic related to educator wellness. It's just a one-pager with some tips for managing stress and anxiety, some self-care, and then also links to access additional supports at this time. So feel free to make a copy of that, send it out to your colleagues, to your families, anything that you think would be appropriate, feel free. And then the last one, this link will send you to our social emotional behavioral wellness website, which is where we will be posting this recording. It will take us about a week to get that up, but it will be a YouTube link that you can send out. But there already are some existing virtual professional developments listed there. So feel free to check those out, and that will be where we will be housing the rest of any webinars that we do. We did one on Monday related to sensory motor integration and play, and that will be posted here shortly. So we are going to pause. We have here about 10 minutes left. we wanted to make sure that you put any additional questions that you might have at this time for us in the chat box. And then there is Krista and I's contact information there at the top. If there's any follow-up questions that you have about a specific resource, about Project Aware, about Avon's process that they went through over the past few months and getting this information to their specific school community, we'd love for you to reach out to us. We just ask that maybe you provide a bit of a 24-hour grace period as we're navigating this new normal ourselves. So feel free to write down our email addresses. And then also the link down here, if you could please take a moment to provide feedback for us on today's webinar. We are shifting our professional development structures and systems at the Department of Education, and any feedback that we can receive from those that are participating in our professional development is super helpful. So Christy has already put the direct link within the chat to this feedback form, and it also serves as a way for you to get your PGPs. So if you fill this out, put your first and last name and your email address, you will be emailed a certificate showing that you were here for an hour and you received credit and received that PGPs. So I'm going to pause, and anyone on the team, if you're seeing any questions come up in the chat box, feel free to unmute yourselves and chime in. But we'll pause here for a moment and see if there's any questions.
So this would be for the Avon team. This is from Kristen, and she's asking about anxiety, and would we place it in the depression stage, or does it span in all stages of grief?
Yeah, so I'll go ahead and answer that question from Kristen. I think the latter part of your statement there really touches on it. Anxiety and any emotion that we're experiencing that comes up can span the entire 5 parts of grief. I like to think of grief broken up into 4 different parts, that we have an emotional response, we have our physical response, we have our social response, and our spiritual response. And those are really going to like umbrella all 5 parts of grief. So anxiety and denial, we might be so afraid or worried that we refuse to believe it. Or anxiety and anger could show up like, I'm so worried and concerned that I don't know how to process it, and instead I'm just outwardly acting and expressing an anger and frustration at other people. Depression and anxiety, we know they do a dance together for a lot of people. They kind of go hand in hand. So we're probably more familiar with it there. But also in that bargaining stage, you know, where we're trying to make deals and pleas with the greater forces that be, that could be that we're too afraid of what's going on. We have too much anxiety and fear coming up in us. So we're trying to mitigate that and make it better in any way we can. And anxiety is still going to take place even when we're in that stage of acceptance. One of the things I said when I was talking about that is that, you know, we get to this place of acceptance while also acknowledging what is hard. It's not black or white, that once we're there, all of a sudden we never feel sad or we never feel anxious again. Really, it's that we're accepting that these emotions, these difficult and challenging emotions, are going to be part of it from now on, hopefully in a smaller way, like they don't have as much power, they aren't feeling as big and overwhelming, but it's still common and normal for anxiety to show up at every part. It's just our ability to process it hopefully gets a little different and easier.
Thanks, Brittany. I appreciate that additional information.
Jess, we've also had a lot of questions about where the recording will be. So give us a couple of days. We have to go through and closed caption this, but it will be housed on our social emotional behavior wellness page, which is doe.in.gov/SEBW. And we'll put that in the chat, but that's where all of the webinars we've had have been posted. So feel free to share with anyone.
And Krista, I'm seeing a question in the chat box from Kara. Have you had or asked any student feedback when you have given out your weekly messages or videos. Any feedback that you've received on your outreach?
So yes and no. Under the advisement of our communication director, we have disabled comments on the YouTube videos when we post them, just to kind of keep the trolls from doing the wrong thing. So we don't allow videos or we don't allow comments on the YouTube videos. Anybody obviously can comment on my Twitter handle when I post them. But we have seen community members and parents retweeting it and commenting that they're, especially this week with Teacher Appreciation Week going on, parents and families that are very appreciative of the spectrum of services that we're trying to provide to students when it's through our Mental Health Monday messages, our Wellness Wednesdays that our counselors are putting out every Wednesday to kind of continue that universal SEL experience going on for students. And just the variety and creative and innovative ways that our teachers are reaching out to students to make sure as much as possible, kids still keep those touch points and those connections and those relationships. So the feedback that we've gotten has been informal, but it's been very supportive so far because we are trying to reach everyone at those different levels, at the different tiered levels through Wellness Wednesday, through Mental Health Monday.
Thank you, Krista. I appreciate that. And Christy went ahead and put the link to our social emotional behavioral wellness website, which is where we will post this recording. If you also go to that website and scroll all the way to the bottom, there's a place where you can sign up for our monthly newsletter. We have also been sending out notification of any upcoming webinars to that listserv. So I think it would be a good thing for us to follow up as well with that listserv with the recordings once they're released. So you'll be notified via webinar, but you'll have to sign up for that listserv there at the bottom. And Anastasia also just put in the chat box that Dr. Becky Bailey from Conscious Discipline has an excellent webinar where she talks about the corona jitters entitled COVID-19 Stress, How Uncertainty Affects Our Brain. So if anyone has the direct link to that webinar, feel free to put it in the chat box. That sounds like something that is directly related to what we're talking about. Okay, so we have about 5 minutes left here. We want to respect your time. If you have gotten everything you need and just need some time, oh, thank you, Anastasia. She just posted that link there. Appreciate that. So if you have gotten everything that you have needed and just need to fill out the feedback form, we would appreciate that feedback. And then feel free to follow up via email with Krista and I. Our emails are listed there. But we so appreciate your time. We'll stay on for about 2-3 more minutes. And if there's any other questions, we will address those.
So Jess, there's a question in the chat box about will we be doing this again before school starts? Our team is currently working on a social emotional mental health reentry plan. So we will have documents to help support that, but we will also host a webinar to go through that. We'll continue our webinar series throughout the summer as well.
There's nothing on Lois's desk.
And then Krista, there is a question. Would you add the names of the people who said the 2 quotes that were given in the presentation? That is a specific question you might be able to find if you're able to in the next few minutes.
Yep, I'm putting those in right now.
Awesome, thank you. So Kathleen, we will put the link to the feedback form one more time. Try clicking that, but if you are still not able to access it, feel free to shoot me an email and I will make sure I follow up with you so that you can gain access to that link. Yeah, Christy just put it one more time. If you click that feedback link, it should work. Thank you for all the kind words left in the chat box. This is very helpful for us. We will wrap up here in about 1 minute. Dawn will end the recording, but feel free again, if there's a question that did not get answered, write down our email address quickly before we end here. But thank you so much for your time today. We hope it was helpful, and we hope that you have a great rest of your week, and be well. Thank you.